Hi, this is Pat Moorhead with Moor Insights and Strategy, and I would like to give you a hearty welcome to another 6.5 Live podcast. We are streaming live on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And I'm joined by my incredible, awesome, friendly, intelligent, handsome co-host Daniel Newman of Futurum Research. How you doing, buddy?
Happy Friday, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. If you're watching this live, thanks for tuning in. If you're listening to it later, we don't care. We love our live audience. We love our audience that catches us on demand on Apple and Spotify and everywhere else that we are. But Pat, another big week or two in tech. And in fact, everyone out there, we're a little sorry. We've been a little bit late. We like to get to you every week. And we are actually doing every week, but we did last week Monday and this week on Friday. So it was a sort of long, almost 14-day or 12-day period since we've done this last podcast, buddy.
Yeah, I think we did sneak in an event for Apple, but maybe that's the one you're counting. But yeah, we should do this scheduled one every week. But this is episode 59, and if it's your first time joining the 6.5, 6.5 represents 6 topics, 5 minutes each. No news, because you can get that everywhere. All analysis and a little bit of opinion. We are going to talk about 2 earnings today, and I will put the disclaimer that this podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Don't use it for investment advice. In fact, just do the opposite of what Daniel and I talk about here. So, Daniel, let's dive in. Antitrust is all over the place, whether it's in the US or the EU, and the latest company to get in the EU crosshairs is Amazon. Amazon, who is a job creator, money maker for certain, and doing a lot for COVID. So Daniel, what's your take on this?
Yeah, this is a big topic and a big piece of news. Over the last few months, we've heard more about the regulators dealing with the platform companies. Here in the US, there's been questions about Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, all of which are under some level of scrutiny. But just recently, the crosshairs of Europe and their anti-competitive boss, Vestager, I forget her first name, and I apologize, but I remember her last name. And she has decided to file or start a probe into Amazon for basically 2 things. The first is the company's use of its competitive advantages to drive more revenue to its private label products. And the second has to do with the company's basically the way it does its search when you pick a product and providing supposed favoritism to those that use the full Amazon supply chain. Now, a little background on this: Amazon has its marketplace. And if you don't know, Amazon has spent over $18 billion this year in support of small business. It is a platform that basically, with very little, unlike say an Apple, with very little requirements, enables small businesses to become sellers, which is a huge thing. And not to mention this year, the average $100,000 seller grew over 60% on the Amazon platform. So it's really been an enabler of business growth during what I would call a tumultuous year. But the EU anti-competitive forces over the last few years have sort of gone through a merry-go-round of putting the big tech in the crosshairs. We've seen it with Apple, we've seen it with Google, we've seen it with Qualcomm, we've seen it with Facebook. So it's almost like Amazon's turn again to be looked at. And so, Pat, I guess the getting away from the news and providing my analysis of what's going on here is that it seems that the EU is doing a fundraising activity again and looking at Amazon as a piggy bank. These claims to me seem a little bit premature and a little bit unreasonable. First of all, private label products from Amazon represent 1% of the company's business. Now, compare that to the likes of Walmart, Costco, and Target at 15, 20, and 33% respectively. Now, yes, the online presence of Amazon is bigger than any of those 3, but in this case, you would have to really look at all those companies which have online presences as well. The second thing is Amazon, I believe, has a fundamental right to control the customer experience. Now, if you order dog food on Amazon and it's coming from a third-party seller does the buyer really even know that easily? I mean, it's a pretty ubiquitous experience. Amazon absolutely does make it available to see it's a third party, but it's not obvious, right, Pat? And having said that, so Amazon is not even saying they do this where they lead with customers that potentially use their full platform of logistics services. But if I was Amazon, I'd say maybe that's smart, because if you want to deliver the best possible experience and you've invested all this money on a global supply chain, how disruptive is it to leave it in the hands of your third-party sellers to do their own supply chain? So I'm kind of looking at both ways, saying I don't know for a fact they do that. That's going to be up to Vestiger to prove. But if they do they have the right to control the customer experience? So in both cases, Pat, I feel like this is a bit of an overreach, at least at this time. There's a lot of burden of proof to be met. And if the U.S. decides to follow suit and try to on the same probe, I think it's going to fail miserably here in the U.S. But Europe has a lower burden of proof to be able to get a fee and a fine. And so what I see happening is it's a fine coming Amazon's way, because that's what Europe does, whether or not Amazon actually has done anything truly wrong.
Yeah, just to put a little bit of I'm going to put a graphic up here. This was from my Forbes article talking about this same thing. And as you can see, this is a Sears and Roebuck catalog talking about how it created its own cameras. It also sold Kodak cameras as well. So this idea of third-party information and using it goes back pretty far. And, like you said, going up to the comparisons, check out this comparison right here. This is the percentage of products that are first party. As you can see, Amazon does 15 times less than Walmart's that is at 15%. But Daniel, all good stuff here. I think, like the Qualcomm investigation, this is just about taxing U.S. tech companies.
And by the way, it's Marguerite. I just name totally slipped, but yes, I mean, right now it feels like it's a speed bump. It's a toll. The EU has definitely made a habit of this. I think in the end, Amazon will continue to defend itself, because right now, again, not to say big companies don't do things wrong, Pat, but right now, what it's being accused of is just clearly not a anti-competitive overreach that I can see.
Yeah. Let's move to the next topic. We're 7 minutes in already, and we're on topic 2. Let's talk about NVIDIA earnings. So first off, they pretty much crushed it. They beat on revenue, they beat on EPS, and they beat on forecast above consensus. And Wall Street did what you would expect, which is made their stock go down. and Daniel, I know you had some really intelligent thoughts on that. We're on a bunch of TV shows. So I'm going to leave that part of it to you, but I did want to break down and where all this growth came from, and it was primarily from gaming and data center. So gaming saw a massive bump, and this has been really driven by the 300 series of RTX gaming cards, which is just, I wonder, when will this stop? All this growth, and it's probably not going to, particularly when we're headed into the holidays and we have COVID and multiple AAA titles are coming out. There was also growth in the data center, and you needed to do a little bit of calculus to figure out where that came from, because 13% of that data center number is Mellanox, and about a third of the data center number is Mellanox. But when you peel that back, 77% of that data center growth was organic, which is just incredible when you look at it. The machine of machine learning training and inference, the wheel just keeps going, primarily on the back of cloud giants.
Yeah, I mean, Pat, look, there was a lot going on in this whole. There was just a tremendous amount in this particular earnings. The growth that you mentioned, the 13% that was associated with Mellanox, made the data center growth look monumental. What I think happened with the street, first of all, the street really represents the future, not the present. And so as news has been breaking for NVIDIA over the past few quarters, the market has essentially been baking that news into the price. So the price has tripled. NVIDIA has almost 100 PE ratio. And now it's just under 100. Now, to give you some context there, Intel sits at just over 8. That means that Intel's stock is valued at 100 times earnings almost. And whereas Intel is only 8. And the reason I say that is these are comparable companies in terms of the market they serve, the technology developed. And so clearly the market's already valuing putting a huge value and a huge premium on what NVIDIA is doing. The ARM deal is another big thing here. And so I said that the ARM deal was a $40 billion deal that, by the way, got washed out by the growth of the market capitalization of NVIDIA within just a matter of hours of it being announced. So what I think happened was the earnings met the expectations that the street already had. The growth was exactly on par with kind of what was expected and what had been set. The forward-looking guidance was good, but just kind of consistent. Wasn't necessarily another blowout quarter. And everyone said, you know what, we may have sort of peaked here, or this is a little, at least a peninsula for the company's growth. And so we are going to pause here or maybe exit here, take some profit, and then wait. And Pat, the one big thing to wait on is going to be the ARM deal. Now, no question, the ARM deal is a tremendous win for NVIDIA. But there is a lot of hurdles ahead for the company. It's going to face regulatory scrutiny in probably every major geo around the world, including RFTC here in the US. And I'm just beginning to start to be able to see the number of companies in the tech sphere that may have questions about this. And you start to add that up, Pat, and a lot of people I think are saying, given that the ARM deal is probably baked into the price, plus the growth has been baked into the price, maybe it's time to just kind of let a few of these things play out. But Pat, the success of NVIDIA this quarter is outstanding. It's still at 77% organic growth in data center, had a blowout gaming quarter. So a lot of kudos to the company, but I do think the market was early and the market had already sort of absorbed a lot of its success.
Yeah, I'm really, they should be feel really good at NVIDIA right now. And, you know, I think the whole industry is looking forward to some competition, increased competition in training. And I think Habana from Intel will likely bring that. And there are a collection of other players. One of them's a wafer scale, but really kind of focused in on the military right now. And then on the inference side, I'm really interested to see what Qualcomm has. So moving on, let's move on to Cisco. Cisco had earnings as well. And as you may remember, they had reduced their forecast in the previous quarter and came up with some pretty nice numbers.
Yeah, so I'll hit on some of the high points, Pat, and I'll let you back me up on all of it. But Cisco had a really interesting period. The stock was super repressed because essentially the company said it was going to be a tough couple of quarters. The sledding for the OEMs from the very beginning of this year, supply chain disruptions, enterprise spending disruptions. Unlike SaaS and some of the cloud players that saw a massive scale and growth, companies that depended on big iron, big infrastructure, big implementations, hardware procurement have had to sort of wade through this pandemic a little bit differently. And for Cisco, it's really been putting pressure on the company's performance every quarter, with the exception of a few parts of its business, namely security and collaboration. But it reset the adjusted earnings, and then it did deliver, Pat. And I think that was a really important thing. It delivered on revenue coming 11.93 and delivered on billion, and it delivered on the earnings at 76 versus 70. The other thing, Pat, that was really promising about the earnings call was listening with Chuck Robbins was basically it's planning in this next quarter to get back to a flat year over year number. Now, this quarter was a 10% annual revenue decrease year over year. And we know how unsatisfied the street is with negative numbers. And even with a global pandemic that had wiped out a third of our GDP in one quarter, people were not happy with anything less than growth. And this is especially true in the tech industry. This upcoming quarter, Chuck Robbins said it's going to be somewhere between 0 and negative 2%. And in my experience has been typically Cisco, they're not a sandbaggers, but they're typically very conservative. So there's a very good likelihood that the company could beat. Now, Pat, a couple of things just to note. The infrastructure business, which is the company's biggest by far, representing more than half the revenue, has seen a pretty significant decline, about 16% decline year over year. And then, the other area being applications, it's at 8% decline. So the only real growth area that holistically has grown has been security. And no question, that's been built upon the success of companies needing to be able to deter threat, which has become a scaled up occurrence during the pandemic. The one other thing that the company could really talk to, Pat, that was exciting has been its transition from perpetual licensing agreements on all of its hardware to subscription-based agreements that are going to drive greater recurring revenue over the lifespan of hardware deployed. This company is moving to flex consumption. It is planning to move to everything as a service. And that migration to those things, Pat, is going to depend on it being able to build trust for recurring revenue. So those are the three things I noticed. I'm guessing by the look you're giving me that those are all the great things you wanted me to leave for you to talk about. Darn it, I hate when I do that.
Yeah, what is this leaving error for Pat? Here's all I'll say is during a time of COVID, what was up was no surprise, and that was services, and that was security. What was down was no surprise. That's infrastructure. You have to get in there to actually install infrastructure. And right now, IT, that is not high on their priority list. Now, what I'll say to the other side of my mouth is some of the growth infrastructure, the Cat 9K, Wi-Fi 6, did very well. And that's important because those are their brand new infrastructure products. And even though the company is going gangbusters on software and security and services, it still very much makes most of its revenue and high margins on particularly switches. So you left me a little bit, but not really. But that's okay, Daniel. I'm sure I'll stick you on some future one. Let's dive in here. In fact, this might be my opportunity here. So AWS made an announcement that said 90% of Alexa inference workloads are done on its own Inf1 instances. And essentially that is their own homegrown infrastructure chip for inference workloads. And if you're at home watching, essentially, there's training where you're training the model, and that's about 10% of the cost, and 90% of the cost is on inference, and that's what they're doing, and that's very big because for the most part, that's done owned by CPUs and by NVIDIA GPUs, and to have a web scale company do their own, I think is super impressive. And let me just give you some of the recent claims that it's making right now. So essentially, AWS said it will bring costs down 37% of a P3 instance and latency down by 19%. And then when you compare it to a GPU, you're looking at 25% lower latency and a 30% reduction in costs over the latest NVIDIA inference chips. And really, it's kind of ironic that the rest of the industry hasn't challenged NVIDIA, but a partner of NVIDIA and a cloud service provider has. And a lot of this magic came from the acquisition that Amazon made of a company called Annapurna. And I know as we've all studied up, Annapurna was primarily the offload engine that it used for networking offload, storage offload, and management. What that same team also cranked out Graviton 2, which is the ARM-based EC2, and it also cranked out these Inferentia chips. So very similar to what we've seen from Apple with its M1 chips, and previous to that, Bionic chips, is using semiconductors, using silicon to have a strategic advantage over your competitors. And I'll add this because vendors like to say this, and provide a better experience?
Absolutely, Pat. The investments that Amazon and AWS are making in competencies and chips is going to serve the company very well in the long run. It's picking its spots right now. It's getting into some very specific areas, focusing on some cores in terms of the data center, and then in terms of AI with Inferentia. I was impressed, Pat, and I'm reading your Forbes article, which, by the way, we'll throw in the show notes so everyone can see it. Great article. There really are some great cost efficiencies here. And one of the things I do love about this is just the democratization of AI. So many companies can benefit, with AWS being the leader globally in infrastructure, used by more companies and more spaces. These instances become available to every company that have data in the cloud on AWS, and it becomes widely available and usable at a continuously lower cost. And so developing these cores and these capabilities becomes something that becomes an immediate return of investment. By the way, I see the whole cloud industry, Pat, the whole hyperscale space, making moves to follow suit. But AWS has been a leader here, has been able to jump out in front. Speaking of the ARM deal and NVIDIA, even with the P4D launch in some other spots of Amazon and AWS are really making sure that all of the most sophisticated AI for training and for inference are being made available in its cloud to be quickly deployed and affordable to companies that are leveraging its infrastructure. So this was impressive, Pat. And by the way, really nice piece. If you're out there, definitely read this, because Pat digs into some of the deets that even I had no idea about.
Well, it is fun. I do talk directly to the creators of Inf1 and Inferentia chips, so it's a lot of fun. It is fun to see chips in action. I was really I felt like I was fighting upstream about 5 years ago, whether people were saying semiconductors were a commodity. And I just laugh now, because it's like semiconductors and SaaS. Those are the two bookends that I think are going to drive growth into the future. So speaking of SaaS, let's talk about Oracle's Future of CX event. And Daniel, I'm going to give most of this to you, but when Larry Ellison shows up, you know that it must be important and must be strategic. And that's exactly what happened here. Larry showed up and he gave the keynote. So Daniel, what were your thoughts?
Well, first of all, nice bedroom, Larry. Thanks for letting us get inside. I don't know which home or which island of yours you happened to be on at this moment in time, but I definitely felt very intimate, Pat, to get into the behind the scene. It's also such a true reflection of a man that's had his level of success, that he's gonna come on and talk about whatever to whomever, wherever, and going to do a good job. Really, Pat, I said that the announcements that were made with him and Rob Tarkoff there were really set on two big topics. There was an investment in virtual selling and another in virtual buying. That was the two big things. So, the company focused on creating better experiences. Let's just kind of we'll kind of start here. It's customer intelligence, it's configuration, it's new subscription management, it's commerce and content. So, I'll give you one. I had a standout announcement on the buying side, and then a standout announcement on the on the selling side. But the customer intelligence improvements were really, Pat, what stood out to me. CX Commerce integrating with their Unity platform provided a streamline of the data environment that basically allowed structured and unstructured data to start to live together, Pat. And this, to me, is a huge deal, because essentially what's going on now is companies have gotten pretty good at dealing with the structured data. This is the data that lives inside your databases, in your ERP, in your Salesforce administration. But where we're seeing this massive growth, you heard about Segment being acquired by Twilio. You're hearing about Unity from Oracle, Microsoft Customer Insights. All these are platforms, or CDPs, these customer data platforms, give the promise of being able to do a 360 of your customer. And that's both the data that lives in your system and that unstructured data that lives throughout the internet, and bring all those things together to create one experience. And that's really, to me, was kind of the takeaway, is Oracle is fully invested in CX through the lens of CDP. It's through the lens of integrating back office and front office, and through the lens of unstructured and structured data together. And the only other thing I noted that was, they did launch a communication solution, but just vertical solutions as a whole. There's a company called C3 AI that recently announced a partnership with Microsoft and Adobe. Well, Oracle on its own is really tackling the same thing and saying, we're going to build out vertical focused solutions, whether it's telecom, healthcare, or finance, that are going to be fully integrated. They're going to be API and UI and UX driven, and they're going to use the skills and experiences that Oracle has because of its hundreds of thousands of customers that are in its system. So all this in a SaaSified model, pretty impressive, pretty good start. And of course, like you said, when Larry shows up, it must be something pretty important.
Yeah. It's funny. Oracle has gone from a relative unknown in this space to setting the agenda. I think this whole notion of connecting the back end to the front end without having 47 APIs and being in real time, nobody can deny that isn't a value, right? And in an ironic twist, Salesforce looks to be behind, and SAP really doesn't have a huge seat at that table. Now, ironically, SAP does have the back end. They just can't seem to connect the two together. And I think the other point that I really appreciated was real examples of real customers who made the switch from Salesforce. And, some of their stories I drilled in on to see, how much reality was behind it. But they had CIOs and VP of marketing saying that it was actually easy to transition, even if you did some of the customizations for Salesforce. So all in all, Oracle seems to be on the move in cloud, and whether that's IaaS or SaaS. And I'm pretty surprised. I know I keep bringing that up, but it was a big surprise. So
yeah, I have to say, and I know we got to jump to the last thing. Just one last thought on this, though, is Oracle as a whole just continues to be gaining some really positive momentum from sources I don't expect. You're just hearing more positive sentiment. There's something going on, and I think that, and you and I are two people that were pretty outspoken critics at times, and I go to these meetings, and they've had lots of these. They just did an ERP event this week to go at their CX event. But the point is the innovation is continuous, and Larry seems to really be on a tear right now, and it's a different company. It just feels different.
Yeah, it feels different. And I think Oracle plays a better front game than it does a back game. Okay. But once they get up there, I think they know how to move it forward. So let's switch topics completely. So, and get into the new Apple MacBooks that are driven by the new M1 processor. So we talked about AWS, who uses semiconductors to drive their strategy for IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. And you have Apple, who has used semiconductors to put distance between itself and its competitors, or at least it tries to. And in this case, they're trying to do this with the Mac that up until this point has been a very low market share game, but they want to use this new M1 to go from single digits and beyond. So one thing I want to say about these first reviews is these are typically reviews that are sampled by Apple. And you have to understand how Apple works. Apple is not going to sample any press or any analyst for that matter who's not going to give them very positive feedback. And I can say this on the whole, there are exceptions. Most of the press uses Macs, so they're very familiar with it, and they're looking for something different. Or something that's new. I go to some of these press conferences and I don't see a whole lot of Windows devices. Now, with that said, the reviews were overwhelmingly positive. They were positive on performance. They were positive on battery life. And for Mac apps, compatibility. What did come out for me were a couple observations. First of all, most of the third-party Mac apps were written for x86 and not written for the M1. And Apple uses Rosetta 2 to be able to make it binary compatible. And it takes an incredible amount of performance to do that. AnandTech showed that it takes, there's a 30 to 70% performance penalty that you get using an x86 app. And that was pretty mind-blowing. And while I'm not done with my review, I've only had my system for about 12 hours. I got 4.5 hours of battery life, not 20, using Outlook, which is an x86 app on the new Macs. I saw incompatibility with Logitech cameras. Microsoft Edge blew up and crashed. You can check out my Twitter feed. So while the first, I'll call them manicured reviews came out overwhelmingly positive, I think I'm recommending that everybody gives it a few weeks and see what the non-closely and tightly aligned reviewers with Apple come up with to get the full picture. And I think that's good for consumers.
Yeah, you pretty much are first in line and first to touch. So Pat, we did a whole show on M1, and I have not seen one yet or touched one yet. That is on my list of things to do. It sounds to me like the prognostications that we both had in our pieces to market are immediately coming true. The compatibility issues. Pat, 4.5 hours of battery on you're saying that was your full battery life before the thing died?
4.5 hours, 90% using Outlook, OneNote, and I did 3 VoIP calls. And man, the early reviews said the fans never came on. My fan never came on until I did VoIP calls. Zoom and WebEx, my fan was humming, like the Intel versions likely would, right? Yeah. But this notion and all the reviews that they never heard the fan, I mean, it took me a few hours of testing to find multiple incompatibilities. I do give CNET credit for saying what I knew would happen. Steam is sluggish, right? And Steam is the avenue to get to most all AAA games. One of the surprises, though, that I saw was that a lot of the aficionados, Apple aficionados, really couldn't stand the iOS app, right? The Mac doesn't have a touchscreen. So, trying to use a touchscreen app without a touchscreen, they were not happy with. So
it's funny you say that. It's funny you say that. It's kind of like all the visions I had of trouble in paradise are going to kind of immediately come true. Look, if you're an average consumer doing just sort of average consumer stuff, a little browsing, a little surfing, a little gaming, it'll probably be fine. It'll be fine. Especially if you really love Mac OS. But here's the thing, for what you're paying, the premium that you pay, the toll of owning Apple, it shouldn't be okay. It should be great. And that is the bar. I always say, like, a lot of people are like, oh, you're too critical. Look, the Steve Jobs Apple would never put out a product with incompatibilities out the gate. And if it did, he would be rolling over in his proverbial grave in his era, right, to get it fixed. He was such a perfectionist. It's just a weird difference, Pat, these days. The company keeps putting out products that don't work. I mean, how long is the keyboard issue gone on with the MacBook Pros? I had a problem with it. And look, I'm critical of Apple because when you charge the prices the company charges and you demand the margins, profit, attention, and respect that the company, your product should be great. And that was the reputation it was built on. And I feel like it slipped from. And it needs to return to that. So I could say we're just discerning. We're discriminate customers that want greatness. When you pay $2,500 or $1,600 for a notebook that does not really out-feature a $600 Windows device or an x86 device, Pat. And so that's my big problem is the company, we knew these things would be a problem. We told them it would be a problem. Yeah. We were criticized by Apple and fans, the Macalope decided to write a whole article about me and my opinion of the problems. But if I'm not mistaken, Pat, it sounds like I was right and you were too. And what will Apple do to address it? That's the question.
Yeah, I don't think Apple's going to do anything. I think they were smart by not doing a 16-inch. It's funny. I didn't fully realize how bad it was only having one open USB slot if you're plugging something in. I don't know how that you call that pro. I think for users who, let's say, might have stuck to an iPad, who only use Apple apps, I think it's going to be fine, because they did optimize their own applications like Mail, like Calendar, and some of their media apps to run pretty well. And they've had years to do this. If you go outside of Apple's software, I think you're going to be in the short term very disappointed. Workstation applications, if you're using AAA games at all, I don't think that you're going to be very happy. But this is going to be the hallmark gift that just keeps on giving, Daniel. And I can't wait to continue to talk about this. But we got a lot of stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks. We've got AWS reInvent, we've got Dell earnings, we've got Qualcomm Tech Summit. So, even the U.S. Thanksgiving is coming up, and we're getting into the Western holidays in December. The tech world continues. So with that, we've got to bring this show to an end. I hope you liked it. If you did, please hit that subscribe button. Give us comments. We are men. We can take it. Even if it's negative. I did see a couple comments that came in, some that weren't necessarily talking about the items that we were talking about. It is Friday afternoon, and we just hope you have a great week. So with that, I'm going to bring this to an end. Have a great one.